Today I'm going to show you how to do a high fire glaze. We're going to be working with Potter's Choice glazes. This one is PC30, which is Tomoku. You can check the blue labels on the glaze. They also are labeled on the lid. This is a deep fire brick. And the colors inside the bucket are not indicative of the colors that the glaze will turn out. They will go through a chemical reaction. And in the end, Tomoku is going to look like that. And deep fire brick will look like this. Right now the colors inside the bucket are just because of the chemicals, the oxides inside. So most of them are a reddish color because of the oxides. Know that some of the oxides can stain your clothing, so you want to be wearing an apron, and I wouldn't wear white. We're going to start by taking our piece that we're glazing. This is a student sample that was left over. And I'm going to take a clean, damp sponge and wipe the outside of the surface and the inside. The reason for this is to get rid of any dust, dirt, or oils that may be left on the piece. This was sitting here over the summer, so it might have a little bit of dust on there. You don't want to have it too wet. If it gets too wet, then the piece will become saturated and it won't be able to let the glaze soak in. So you just want to wipe it down, get any dust off, make sure to get inside, and make sure your sponge is really clean. If the sponge is dusty or has glaze on it, it's not going to work as well. So once we have it all cleaned out, you're going to want to make sure that you're only touching it with clean hands from here on out. Make sure your hands are free of any glazes or clay. So I'm going to set this down on my tarp. I've laid out a tarp so that the glaze doesn't drip all over the table or onto the floor. And I've mixed up one of the glazes already. I'm going to show you how to mix the other one. You'll want to use a paint stir stick. Make sure that you scrape the bottom of the barrel and check and see if any glaze is piled up on the bottom. It will look like this if there is glaze stuck on the bottom. If so, you need to use the drill with the mixing attachment, and we're going to stick it into the bucket. It's going to get a little loud here. And you don't want to hold it on full blast or it might splash out, so I'm just going to press it for a couple seconds, let go, press it again. Okay, I'm going to mix up the Tomoku, and I want to scrape all the glaze off the wall. It's important that you get all of the chemicals from the glaze into the bucket. So I'm scraping excess dried glaze off the wall and pushing it into the bucket. Once I get the majority of it off, I'm going to use the drill with the mixing attachment to stir it up. You want to mix everything in. It shouldn't be chunky like this. So I'm going to first scrape all that off the wooden stick. And then I'm going to use the drill to mix the glaze. You can pull the drill attachment out to make sure there's not thick chunks sitting on the bottom. I'm going to tap the drill off, set it on the tarp, and use my stir stick one more time to scrape the bottom to make sure there's not any excess clumps down there that didn't get mixed in. And the stir stick looks pretty good. I'm going to do a dip test now with the Tomoku, so I'm going to stick a clean, dry hand into the glaze down to my second knuckle. Pull it out. The glaze should cover your finger. You should still be able to see the curves of your nail and your knuckles, but you shouldn't be able to see through that glaze. So the Tomoku is a really good consistency. If it were too thick and I couldn't see my nail, I would want to ask the teacher to add some water to the glaze and then mix it up. If it's too thin, we're going to have to add some salt or mix some more glaze mixture into the glaze bucket. For my mug, I'm going to coat the inside of my piece first. I'm doing the inside Tomoku, and then I'm going to do the outside a deep fire brick. So to get only the inside of the piece, we're going to use the pouring method. I have a clean glaze cup that I'm going to stick into the Tomoku and fill up. Then I'm going to carefully pour that glaze inside the cup, making sure not to drip on the outside. Set this down on the tarp. I want to swoosh the glaze around inside the mug carefully and then quickly dump it out. Notice that I didn't slowly pour. It was a quick motion upside down so that the glaze does not run down the side. I'm going to hold it upside down, shaking the mug so that any excess glaze comes out. You don't want to leave it in there too long or it will get thick. Notice how the glaze, when it's wet, is shiny, and as it dries, it turns matte. So you can see how it's matte on some of the sides. Because I've missed some of the edge, I'm going to dip the first inch or so of the top, and that will make a cool combination when the deep fire brick and the Tomoku overlap later. It will be interesting. So I'm going to just hold that upside down and dunk it, submerge it into the clay, or glaze, sorry. We're gonna hold it in there for 2 seconds, 1, 2, and pull it out, shake. Let it dry completely. You can see again that the shiny pieces are still wet, and as it dries, it's starting to turn matte. And before we dip it for the second time, you want 2 coats on here. Before we dip that again, we want to make sure it's completely dry. So I'm waiting for these edges right here to not be shiny any longer. Okay, now that that first layer has dried, I'm going to dip it for a second time. Just going to hold it in there for 2 seconds. Dip, 1, 2, and pull it out. I'm going to shake it so you can get any excess drips off. And then we'll set it to the side. Now I want to stir my deep fire brick. That's what I'm using for the outside. We already mixed this up with the drill, but I just want to agitate it a little bit more to make sure everything's mixed in really well. And I'm going to be using tongs so that I don't touch the portion that I've already glazed. To use the tongs, you're going to clamp onto the piece, hold nice and tight. I like to support it until I'm ready to dip it in there. And I'm going to overlap them a little bit, and they'll come out a new fun surprise color. So we're going to just dip it into the deep fire brick and hold it in for 2 seconds. Bring it out and shake it off. You can kind of see where they've overlapped right now. The deep fire brick's a little bit on the thin side. So we're shaking it to make sure that the drips fall off. And as it's drying, you can see with this one, it turns a little bit lighter. It's more chalky, and then where it's still wet, it has that shiny, darker color. So you want to wait until this is completely chalky, and I can actually touch that with my hand now where it's chalky. You don't want to touch it where it's still wet. Okay, now that it's dry, I'm going to grab it with my fingers and release the tongs. I want to rotate the tongs so that I'm not leaving little dots where the tongs were. So I'm sliding the tongs over, and then this time when I dip it, those 2 empty spots will get covered. So I'm going to submerge it again for 2 seconds. and pull it back out. Shake it off, and you can see this time how it's a little bit thicker. It's not drying as quickly because it's a thicker coat. We're going to shake it off and hold it with the tongs until it's completely dry. Once I remove the tongs, I can dip my finger into the glaze and drop 2 little droplets over the tong spots that are left. You can see that my other tong marks are now covered up. Now that the piece is dry and I've fixed the little spots from the tongs, I'm going to take a damp sponge and wipe the bottom, the foot or the base of the pot. So I'm just twisting the sponge along the base, and you want to make sure that all of the glaze comes off so that it doesn't stick to the kiln shelf when it's being fired. Some of the glazes tend to be a little bit runny, and that will be indicated on the side of the glaze container. It will say runny in permanent marker. If it is runny, you kind of want to wipe just a little bit up the edge of the pot like this so that the glaze has a little bit of space to run. So once the foot is completely clean like this, we're going to take a walk into the glaze room or the kiln room. And you're going to place your piece on the cardboard shelves that say high fire cone 6. They will be fired in the kilns at cone 6. We're going to set it in the back so that no one else has to touch your piece, and leave it there for me to put them into the kilns for firing. That's it. Thanks. Now that you're all done glazing, you want to make sure that you wash off your tongs, the stir sticks, and any containers that you've used for glazing. It's really important that the glazes don't get cross-contaminated or they'll lose their color. They'll all end up being a brown color. So we want to make sure that we wash out our sponges, stir sticks, and glaze containers, and any brushes you may be using in the sinks. Please make sure not to get any clay on them either. Thanks.